All right, welcome back to my series on the world building basics, In this one, we're going to continue where we left off, which was in the last one, came up with little bits of history. Not the best story example for doing history, but we're going to dive back in with culture. And this is often where a lot of people will actually not do enough. You know, you spend so much time trying to come up with all these history bits and these grand details about the world, and then you forget that the people actually need to have some culture. Okay? And a lot of times, again, if you need help, you can use ChatGPT or another AI if you have a preference in that regard for getting ideas and brainstorming. I always use fantasynamegenerators.com for names because there's no point in taking forever to try and think of the perfect name that doesn't exist. Just find something you like and keep moving. You can always change it later. And really, your third and most important tool is your own imagination and a combination of your imagination and your genre savvy. I tend to think of it as, I should say, all of the books you've read, all the movies, the anime, whatever it may be that you've consumed over the years, all of that goes into your knowledge of a genre, which should be a genre that you like, and that would be what you're going to be writing in. You know, don't try to write in something you don't like, is the point there. With spoken, my clumsy speech ways. So, what we need to kind of worry about as far as culture right now, at least in terms of starting off, because again, you don't want to waste a whole bunch of time developing out a culture for people that may not even show up in the story. So the question you start asking yourself is, okay, what are the people that are actually going to be in this story enough to warrant spending time on building out a more developed culture for them? Well, a lot of the story is going to be taking place around this town of Greenavik, because this is where our protagonist is going to live, and that's going to make it kind of a central location. So we need to develop this place. We would want at least some cultural details of the antagonistic empire to the south that's going to be, is starting to destroy parts of the forest. And we might need some cultural info on the woodland elves, because that might be where you get a second character from. Okay? But where you start is where you definitely 100% know you need to expand first. For that, it's our town of Greenavik. So let's just stop and think what makes some sense. We know it's kind of a small community in this pine forest next to a river, and it fled the expansion of the empire several decades ago, so it's not a big or an old settlement. So what is some of the culture? I think it's probably, and you might just make a note like this, like hardy people. You know, these are potentially some of the older people living there were the ones who originally founded the place. So it's going to be the founders and their descendants, maybe 3 generations at most. I mean, if you think in terms of maybe a new generation is maybe every 20 years or so, you know, in order for the one group to have children and then those children to grow up, and then they would need to have children that can and grow up. So 18 to 20 years, we're talking, you know, so this settlement could be within 50 to 60 years old ish. which really isn't enough time to develop a really strong local culture in and of itself, but we can say that they've brought a lot of customs and things with them. So, share a lot of customs and holidays, religion, etc. with the humans of the empire. Okay? And this first pass, because we're talking about basics here, that this series is about the very start, the basics. This is a first pass sort of thing. You want to get the first little things that you know you'll need. And then you can take those little things and build them out further. So we know that there are hardy people, and they're going to share a lot of customs and holidays, everything with the humans of the empire. So we can build out all that stuff later. Right now, we're worried about figuring out what it is we actually need to build. Okay? Because that's kind of the hardest part right there, is figuring out what you need to build. You know, and again, I've talked about this before, but one of the big traps that a lot of people fall into when they're getting into world building for a story in particular, or even for RPG campaigns, is doing too much. You know, you don't need a 30, 40, 50 page document about every single little custom and every holiday and every last detail about the customs and culture of every single fantasy species or race or whatever in your entire story. How much of that's actually going to get into the story? Practically none of it in most cases. Okay, if you're doing some huge political drama, then you're going to need a lot of stuff like that. Probably not 50 pages worth, but, you know, a political drama is one thing. This story is a different one. Every story is different. Every story is going to need more or less. So, focus on what you need. Okay? That is always going to be my number one lesson for all of these videos, is focus on what you need and build from there. Alright. So we have our kind of our jumping off point there. Let's go back and we can say that now here, this is where we want to kind of, not necessarily the politics, but culture includes things like castes and social hierarchies, all of that sort of stuff. So the town, I don't think it's probably going to have a lot of that sort of thing, but an empire is going to have a lot of it. Okay? So if it is ruled by centaurs, we know that is one thing that is a detail. It's ruled by centaurs. And then there's humans, plains, elves, and minotaurs. So we ask, okay, how would the casting work here? How would the caste system work? You could say, well, would they see themselves as being kindred to humans and elves because, you know, centaurs are upper half human, lower half horse? Or would they consider them to be lesser beings because they don't have the equine superiority of a centaur? And would they view minotaurs as closer to being equals, or are the minotaurs more like mindless brutes? What kind of minotaur are you going for? Are you going for animalistic, violent creatures, or are these more intelligent minotaurs or minotaurs? So we could say that ruled by centaurs, humans and elves are considered lesser. Minotaurs are mostly found in the military. Okay, so now we're starting to build out some culture for the Empire. And what is even just this little bit right here? What does it tell us? It tells us that there is snobbery, there is a caste system, basically, definitely a massive dose of social hierarchy taking place. Maybe not strict caste system, but if humans and elves are considered lesser, it's the sort of thing, how much lesser? This is where you start asking yourself questions, and you can use AI to help you when you get stuck. It's always there to, is a good brainstorming tool when you get stuck. But where you usually want to start, and it helps to build out your imagination. You know, it's kind of like a muscle. You have to use it. You don't necessarily want to run to the AI for everything all the time, or you never learn to build out your own imagination. You know, the AI is a tool. It's there to help overcome obstacles, to brainstorm. I have a lot of trouble writing prose. I get bored very easily. I get sidetracked very easily, so I do use AI for prose writing, but I guide it every step of the way. It's a tool I use to overcome something that I have trouble with. Okay, you don't use AI to replace you as a person, as the storyteller. You use it to reduce weaknesses, overcome obstacles, and when you get stuck for brainstorming. Okay. So what else can we come up with? We probably should take a look at the woodland elves. So what kind of culture are they going to have? Do we want to go, you know, super flower child type of elves, more like Warhammer Fantasy? These sons of bitches will just kill your ass if you get into their territory, that kind of thing. A little bit somewhere in between, maybe. Um, let's go for somewhere in between, cultural wise. Um, see themselves as guardians of of the forest, will tolerate outsiders to an extent, but will not hesitate to kill anyone that they think is causing trouble. This isn't necessarily culture as much as it is how they deal with other people, but that's part of culture too. So what is kind of their culture? Guardians of the forest. Um, we can also think of like social hierarchies for the elves. Is it like a warrior culture? Is it like a mageocracy sort of thing where the spellcasters have a lot of the power? Let's go with that. Mageocracy. Mageocracy. That's probably not spelled right. Casters have most of the, not most, but have the most power. But let's say they're not assholes about it. Okay. And literally. Because at this point, like I said at the beginning, this is more note taking. This is getting started. World building basics, remember. Basics. Okay, is there anything else we can kind of build out here just a little bit as a first pass? Let's go ahead and give these guys a holiday or something. And we can go ahead and say that All Souls Celebration, Woodland Festival, Festival of Peace, Celebration of Fertility. Eh, Feast of Friendship, Feast of the Birds. That sounds interesting. We can come up here and get a bird, the silver-capped jays, and say that Feast of Birds, a celebration when the silver-capped jays start migrating, or something like that. And why is that important? Well, maybe we could have the story start on the Feast of Birds, or it's a major celebration that's coming up that takes part in the story. It's just a little detail. It's something that you can latch on to and then work with more later and build out later. Basics. Alright, so that's going to wrap it up for this video. I hope you found it informative. And hit the subscribe button. Don't forget to like, share, and leave a comment if there's... let me know what you have trouble with world building, and I'll get to that in other videos or directly in the comments. I have more resources in the description on Amazon books that you might want to check out. And once more, thanks for watching. I'll see you on the next one. Later.